My guest today is Lue Elizondo, who is a former senior intelligence official, a disclosure advocate, a national security expert, and perhaps most interestingly, the former director of the Pentagon's UFO/UAP program, known as ATIP, AATIP. So, Lue, thank you very much for being here. It's been a bit of a challenge getting some of the key figures in the UAP world to talk. So thank you very much for agreeing to be here.
Mick, it's my pleasure, and you give me too much credit for calling me a key figure in the UAP topic. That I think there's a lot of people that probably deserve that credit. I'm probably like you. I'm a spoke in a much greater wheel.
Well, I think people would disagree with you there, but thank you for your humility. And we've got a lot of material to cover and lots of questions, and I'm going to try to take things kind of roughly chronologically. But first of all, I wonder if you could just give a 1 or 2 sentence description of what you think a UAP is. What's your personal definition of a UAP?
Wow. Well, Mick, I think that definition is constantly evolving, and it evolves with our understanding. There was a time in our history, and I'll try to be brief with this, but it's not a simple question. Mm-hmm. There was a time in our world where anything that wasn't a bird that we saw in our sky and it wasn't a star was mysterious, right? These supposed traveling stars, and they turned out to be planets, and then of course comets later on that had this almost supernatural type of identity, if you will, where if you saw a comet in the sky, some people thought it was a sign of things to come. It was foreboding, and it would cause sickness and disease. That was by definition a UAP. And then of course we began to understand that, and then you have in the 1940s you have these cargo religions that were established in the South Pacific based upon World War II aircraft flying over these remote portions of the South Pacific Sea, flying over an island, maybe dropping some provisions, and that was a UAP, right? They were gods from coming down from heaven, dropping off food for the people on the islands, and that was very much by definition a UAP. And so it's hard to say what is a UAP, because I think as we gain additional understanding into science and into technology, a lot of what was considered UAP before is not a UAP anymore. Anything by definition is an unidentified aerial phenomenon until it isn't. I think the definition of UAP is a moving target, and what was once a UAP is now something that can be explained.
Okay.
For me, anything can be a UAP until it's not, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah. Okay. All right. So let's start with the FLIR video, the Nimitz video. And my hypothesis there is that it's some kind of distant flying plane or drone or something like that, and that it doesn't make any sudden movements. Now, a lot of people, they look at this video, it's kind of this blurry video taken by Chad Underwood. It's very low resolution, and you see the thing kind of jumping around. But I think it always coincides with a change in the camera system. And I did a detailed breakdown where I went through the video one step at a time, saw when the camera had changed, or there was some kind of camera rotation, or a lens change, or change from IR to TV mode. And it was always correlated with some kind of movement of the object and a loss of lock, and then a regaining of lock, until the final thing where there was one big camera movement and there was a loss of lock and it just didn't regain the lock. And then the camera changed from tracking mode to, I believe, the ground tracking mode. And then the object itself went off to the side. Are you aware of first of all, what do you think of that analysis, if you're familiar with it at all? And do you think that it's being proven the other way?
I think, let me answer great questions. And you have a couple questions there, so I want to make sure I'm thorough and answer them appropriately. Do I think your analysis is valuable? Absolutely. It's always valuable. Did we conduct our own analysis? Absolutely. Very comprehensive analysis. Did we come up with the same conclusion you did? We did not. And my question to you would be: is you're looking at the video? Are you certain that there's not other video, or perhaps that there's also perhaps radar data that correlates with what the pilot testimony?
That would be great, but unfortunately, I've only got the video to go by. But my point there
Correct.
isn't really that there may be other data, is that people are taking the video itself and they're saying, this video itself shows these things. Like Chad Underwood says, this video shows the object flying off very rapidly at the side. Within the unidentified TV program on the History Channel, it was claimed that this video itself was evidence of the object flying off. And I would put it that the video itself could be interpreted as just a regular object not making any sudden moves.
I think your interpretation is I think you're certainly entitled to your own opinions and your own interpretation. I will tell you, with my experience, take it for what it's worth, that was not the interpretation. And we look at things in the government, we tend to look at things holistically. We try to avoid single source reporting from an intelligence perspective. It's kind of a no-no for us, right? Just like in the world of reporting, you never look at a single source. And so that's why it's important to look at these videos in the greater context of in the manner in which they were taken and the circumstances. So, anybody can look at a video, and we see all the time videos that show things that appear to be marvelous and then turn out to be not so much, right? And then in hindsight, there's also other examples where you look at something and something seems to be fairly rudimentary, and all of a sudden you realize after some careful analysis that it's actually extraordinary. And my caution to anybody out there, is when you're looking at a video, understand that a video itself is only going to tell you so much. And that's why you need additional information to look at that can either corroborate or refute that information. And based upon my experience in the ATIP program, there is certainly additional information that made it very, very compelling. And again, people are going to say, well, what is it, Lou? Why don't you tell us? I mean, we want to know. Well, I can't, but that information is starting to come out. And when you look at that data that's compared to not only what you see on the GAN camera footage, what you hear with the eyewitness testimony, what you see on the Hawkeye radar information, which is backed up by the Spy 1 radar data from the Princeton, and possibly, and I'm not going to say yes or no, other sensors that were in the area at the time. Now you've got a much more complete picture of what's actually going on.
It would be great if I could get that picture, of course, but unfortunately, I'm just like, a member of the public. All I have access to is this one video. But let's move on to the next. And
I respect that tremendously, and this is why, Mr. West, I wanted to have this conversation with you, because I think it's unfair for me to criticize you, and I think it's unfair.
No, I'd be happy for you to criticize me.
No, it's not. It's not a personal thing. I think everybody is entitled to.
No, I didn't mean that, but I mean,
this is
criticize specific things that I've said is fine. Like if I've said something that you think is wrong, then I would be happy to be sure.
Well, there's a difference between being critical analysis and criticizing, and okay. I think critical analysis.
To the former. Okay, the gimbal video is a bit more self-contained, I think, because there isn't that much kind of other stuff associated with it, at least in public. The gimbal video shows what looks like a little flying saucer type thing, and it's got this aura around it, and that was kind of reflected in the title of the New York Times article, "Glowing Auras and Black Money." But the aura was later discovered to be just kind of a standard artifact of the infrared camera system. It's this thing called an unsharp mask, which creates contrast in the boundaries between light and dark. And yet this was something that was promoted on the TTSA site, that there was an aura. On the New York Times thing, it was on unidentified. Why wasn't this discovered? If it's such a fairly simple thing that it's just an artifact of the camera. Even Jeremy Corbell now admits that it's just an artifact of the camera. Why wasn't this discovered right from the start?
Well, because I don't subscribe to that. I think you can look at something and say, oh, it's a artifact of the infrared and heat signature. But are you sure there was even a heat signature creating that? I mean, I don't know the physics, what creates that, and whether it is something naturally occurring or not. But there are other explanations. What you see on a camera, you can say, well, this explains that. Well, but there's other things that do too. And you're assuming that it had a heat signature, right? Because we're looking.
What do you mean by a heat signature, though? I think there's a lot of confusion as to what a heat signature means. So from your
infrared. So infrared, in a technical perspective, you're looking at light wave energy below the visible spectrum of the red frequency, right? So infrared, which means below red, and you're usually typically dealing with that type of signature can be attributed to heat, right? Infrared. We use infrared cameras.
If you're getting a picture of something, aren't you getting a heat signature? It's an infrared camera. You can only see it if it has a heat signature.
Well, that's not true. What you see is contrasting in temperatures. It's not necessarily heat. You can also see with infrared cameras cold spots, which is the absence of heat. So my point being is that, we have to be very careful when we're looking at something. If we see something that fits a conventional model, well, okay, great. But I guess my word of advice to anybody, and this is including folks in the government as well, always look at the second and third order layers of data. It's important not to, and this is what we found in ATIP. In some cases, it would help us find conventional explanations. In other cases, it didn't. If you see something, an accident on the street, for example, you see two cars collide and one naturally assumes one car hit the other. Well, okay, it may appear that way, but you have to start, that's where the investigation really is important, that investigative process, to make sure you're not assuming or presuming something simply based upon looking at something in a video. Sure.
But, that's what it looks like to me. It looks like it is a glare of a heat signature, which would be like something like a jet. Like my broader hypothesis with this is that, if you have a heat source, which I'm simulating here with a light source, and you shine it at a camera, then you get this glare around it, which is much bigger than the heat source. And we see this in videos of jets. The heat source covers the jet itself. It actually something that does actually happen.
It does happen. You're right. That's called lens flare. Yeah.
Well, that's not really lens flare. Lens flare is the reflection. No, this is lens flare over here. The reflection within the lens. This is glare.
But your lens flare is creating a halo effect, if you will, from the object. And so a lot of people have said, well, this is an artifact of the camera, or this is lens flare, or this is an uneven distribution of light energy, as you say, from a heat source, creating this fuzziness, if you will, or this aura. But again, you have to understand temperature differences. You have to understand heat differences. You have to all those things to determine.
And I have done a lot of research on this. But one thing that really I think sways the argument here is that in the gimbal video, you've got this saucer-shaped thing in the middle, which you say might not be a glare, but I think it is a glare. And at some point you see it rotate, which is very strange, and it's the thing that gets everybody excited. But if you look at the high quality versions of the video that were finally released by the DoD, you see that the horizon stays solid. It stays at a certain angle. I think it'd be this angle. And then you see this thing in the middle here. And you see the shape of this thing rotate. But you also see light patterns in the sky rotate coincidentally with this thing here at the same time, which seems to suggest to me that it is, in fact, the rotation isn't a rotation of the object itself. It's a rotation of something in the camera system, which is causing these reflective internal patterns to rotate and this glare to rotate. Is that something that was even considered?
Yes, sure it was. But when you look at the horizon doesn't change.
Right, but that's the whole point, though. I mean, no, it wouldn't change because there's this thing in the cameras called a derotation mechanism that corrects for the gross gimbal movements of the camera. The thing. It's a 500-pound, 6-foot-long pod, and it's got this very heavy front thing at the end, And when that thing does a big rotation, that thing itself weighs like 80 pounds or something. It's got these big gears grinding, and it kind of jutters around. So they try to minimize the use of that, and they use the internal steered mirrors to actually track things most of the time. But when it transitions over 0 degrees, it has to rotate. And we see that in the videos. You actually see it in the Fleur 1 video, the Nimitz video, and we see it in the gimbal video that there is a rotation. And it seems like the entire light field rotates and this little object rotates, which really suggests to me that it's
the only way you're going to get a horizon to stay straight. Let's go back to then some study here. Let me grab this for a second. Forgive me. This nail represents an object flying, and this is a horizon line. The only way I'm going to be able to demonstrate this rotating and this staying straight is if I have 2 different cameras, one focused on this and one focused on this, and the one that's focusing on this doesn't change while the one focusing on this does change. In this particular case, you have one camera focusing on both the horizon and the object itself, and the orientation of the horizon does not change consistent with the orientation of the object inside. Furthermore, you have the eyewitness testimony of the individuals who got pretty up close and personal to this thing as it was rotating. And again, you're seeing
we have.
Go ahead.
Do we actually have eyewitness testimony? I think we have the audio on the tape itself, but
yeah, we have eyewitness testimony. You might not have it, but it's there.
You have it. You have. So you say that an eyewitness saw.
I'm a public. I mean, I'm a civilian right now. I'm no longer a public servant, so I don't have it now. But I'm very well aware of that case.
Yeah, I think respectfully, I don't think you understand the argument I'm making with the rotating glare and the horizon and the
maybe
horizon
not.
staying.
Please explain.
And we don't really. I think we really have time to get into it, but basically, the camera system is mounted on 2 axes externally. The big, external 600-pound thing, and because of that, you can't actually track something from left to right ahead of the forward position just with that gimbal system. So when it transitions 0 degrees, and this is something that's mentioned in the pattern, it has to do a rotation, a physical rotation of the whole system. Now, this would make the image rotate. So to counter that, it has an internal system called a derotation system, which rotates the image back so that the horizon doesn't move. So you've got this camera going like this, and then it does this little flip, and then it carries on, or it does a couple of them, corrections, kind of try to minimize image disruption. And then it's derotated. This image is derotated. So from the pilot's perspective, you don't see anything. It just looks like you're tracking from left to right across 0 degrees. Everything is fine. But because there's been a rotation of the camera, and because the glare is relative to the orientation of the camera, this makes the glare rotate, but the horizon not rotate.
I'm not sure I'm tracking. I apologize. Yeah. I think what you're saying is that the software is correcting, is somehow keeping the horizon line straight, but because the physical attribute of the camera having to rotate, the object is rotating. But I'm not familiar with the system not flipping if you're going to rotate the object while not rotating the horizon.
Yeah, it's not rotating the object though. It's rotating a glare, like the shape of the glare. Like
I see what you're saying. Oh, okay, yeah. I see what you're saying. You're saying okay, so you're presuming or assuming that the object inside is not even perhaps an object. You're just referring to if it was a glare and not.
Well, I mean, I think it's an object. Like this flashlight is an object, right. But when we turn it to the camera, all we see is the glare. And then if I was to rotate this camera, you would see the glare rotate, even though
what your hypothesis is, correct me if I'm wrong, but I just want to make sure I get this correct. Your hypothesis is that the object that is creating that glare, you're not actually seeing in the camera. You're only seeing the glare. Is that what you're
So I'm thinking you're looking basically at the tailpipe of an FA-18 that's like 10 miles away.
No, I understand what you're saying. I will have to respectfully disagree. And again, please don't. I'm not. I'm certainly not trying to be argumentative here.
No.
But the data that we had did not demonstrate that you were just looking at a glare.
All right. Well, we've already got 8 minutes left, so I want to just really quickly get onto the Go Fast video.
Okay.
Now, the go fast video, it was said originally that it was a low and fast object, but if you do the math on the range and the angles that are shown on screen, you can see that it's actually a high and slow object. Are you familiar with this discrepancy?
Well, I'm familiar with the alleged discrepancy, but that is not the position of those that were inside the government. So, you know, I'm always, I think an alternative hypothesis is always interesting and always worth having a discussion about.
It's pretty straightforward math, though. I mean, would that imply that the readings that are displayed on screen are actually wrong, the angle and the range?
Well, that's a question we'd have to go back with, isn't it? That's a question that we'd have to go back and figure out why there's a discrepancy. Right. I can tell you that several individuals that were very qualified, particularly in that particular collection platform, were able to discern that this was an object that was indeed moving at a fairly fast speed. I can't tell you what that speed is, but I know what was indicated to me after quite a bit of analysis. And by the way, let me make this clear: it wasn't world according to Lue, or it wasn't even world according to ATIP. We had truly some of the finest engineers and scientists and other organizations within the intelligence community providing that data to us, because we're not engineers, right? So we really needed those experts to tell us what it is we were seeing. And then the discussion with the pilots were also very interesting, because according to them, and according to, again, radar data, not just what you see in the camera, that the performance characteristics of this object, in particular, the way I presume you're talking about, again, go fast, is that correct?
Yeah.
That there was some very compelling signatures associated with that video.
All right. So you have access, or you've had access to additional data.
I do not have access now, and let me make this clear, because I have a non-disclosure agreement with the government, and I know it drives people nuts. But I do not have access to that data now or anymore. But fortunately, there are people in the government that do, and they have a lot more information than just that. So again, I guess my word of advice to anybody, not just you, but anybody, even to myself and everybody, we try our best to avoid single source reporting. It's very important to, when you are looking at something, have all the available data that you can have in order to cross-reference what you're seeing, because seeing something is only part of the picture. And again, remember, what you're seeing may only be a portion of an event. It may not be the entire event. All right.
I know we're not going to get to all my questions that I have here, but I want to just do one more thing that I want to discuss briefly with you. There was a case publicized by Leslie Keane in the Huffington Post about the Chilean Navy. The Chilean Navy, they saw a object ahead of them, and it looked like it was just some kind of black blob on the IR, and they couldn't really make it out in the TV mode. It started spewing out some stuff out of the back, and it was investigated as a UFO by CEFA, I think CEFFA.
Oh. Yes, if I look like a contrail, like a black contrail coming out at the end of it. I think I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, and that was something they investigated for 2 years. And Leslie Keane, if you look at her original article, she said, like, it was highly trained Navy pilots who were, trained to observe these things. And then they had this whole team of people. They all sat around the table, and they sent out to other places to get sources, and they looked at the radar data in the area.
I can tell you from my perspective, and I also want to say this, and I'm unqualified to make this assessment. To me, it looks, when you look at the video, it looks like a plane. It looks like an aircraft traveling at a relative, cruising speed. But I wasn't there for that, and I will tell you now, I do not, nor did I have access to any of the data that the Chilean military had access to. So I guess cannot.
My point here is that we've got this group of highly trained people, like the Chilean. I mean, probably not as good as the U.S. Navy, but they're still they're pretty good people.
Hey, listen, you know what? To fly a multi-million-dollar weapon system, there's no such thing as not being good. There may be people that are better, but they're all good.
Yeah, I think it's a helicopter pilot. But my point is, they couldn't figure out what it was after 2 years, and then they released the video. And within a week, people on the internet tracked down exactly what plane it was. It was, as you said, it was a plane. And those things that looked like contrails were actually contrails. They're a type of contrail called aerodynamic contrail.
I'm not surprised. Yeah.
But, if that big team of people can spend 2 years looking at something and get it wrong, what's to say that you haven't done that?
Yeah, well, I can't speak for the Chile again. Back to what I said. I can't speak for the Chilean armed forces. I don't know when they had who they had looking at it. I can only speak from my perspective with the United States government. You're asking me to hypothesize the capabilities of aerospace engineers, if they were used at all, in Chile.
Right, but a bunch of nerds on the internet figured it out in less than a week. I think it was about 3 days before the plane itself was ideated.
I think that's testimony to the wonderful world of social media and the World Wide Web. Yeah. This is exactly why the UAP issue on social media, and as we're seeing now on Twitter, is so good, because you're getting a lot of different perspectives and a lot of different minds looking at the same object. But I can tell you what I saw in that Chilean video, for me is not what compelled me to continue to pursue this in the government. What I was privy to was far more compelling than what I saw in that Chilean video. And by the way, no disrespect to anybody who's been part of that Chilean video analysis, because again, I don't know them personally, and it's not a personal thing for me. My honest opinion, it looks like a typical standard aircraft, probably a commercial plane. Maybe with a slight increase in altitude, and you're looking at its contrails, probably from twin engine, I suspect. I don't know for sure. But it looked like that to me.
An interesting thing about that case is if you look at it, it is actually, you can't see the plane in the infrared. All you can see is the glare of the engines, which is a lot bigger than the plane, which is very similar to the gimbal video. But I guess my point here is, I think this is why I don't entirely believe, and I say I don't believe you. I believe that what you're saying is true, but I think there is a possibility still that you may be mistaken and your group may be mistaken, even though they're highly talented people and they've got all this extra information. I still feel that because the Chilean government messed up.
Well, I'll tell you one thing for sure: governments mess up all the time, Mr. West, and we're fooling ourselves if they don't. I mean, I'm not going to go into anything political here, but we've started wars off of mistakes. Okay, so if anybody thinks that their government is perfect, then I've got a bridge to sell you. But the government is trying, and I think that when you apply, the talent and resources that we had available, it paints a very compelling picture. Do we have the answers? No. That's why they're called UAPs, because at the end of the day, we don't know what we're dealing with, and maybe it is in some cases, something that can be conventionally explained. In these three cases, I beg to differ. But that's okay, because that's the beauty about this conversation.
Yeah,
I think ultimately, the truth has nothing to fear. The truth always comes out. And if it turns out to be, a kid with a remote controlled airplane with some tinfoil wrapped around it to, spoof a camera, then so be it. Then we have an answer, right? And I think that's okay.
Yeah, we're all searching for answers here, and this is
and look, as far as belief, I look, there's four categories of people, and I know we're going over my time, but let me if I may just digress here.
Sure.
There are four categories of people. The first category are those, no matter what happens, they're always going to be believers. The second category are those people that believe now, but they can probably be convinced otherwise if there's compelling information. The third category of people are those people who don't believe, but can probably convince otherwise if there's compelling information. And the fourth category is those people who are never going to believe no matter what happens. Okay.
Sure.
My job is not to convince anybody of anything. I'm not trying to have any, I don't give a damn if people believe me or not. My focus has been getting the government engaged to figure this out, which is what it should be doing. Whether it's a balloon, whether it's little green men from Mars, whether it's a Russian news surveillance platform or anything else, the government has a job to figure it out and not ignore it, period, full stop. And so that is what compels me to continue doing what I'm doing and have this conversation openly with anybody who wants to have it. I don't get paid a penny for this. I don't have my YouTube channel. I'm not getting advertisements. I'm doing this because I believe in what I'm doing. And I'm not going to focus on the first category, those people who are true believers, and those people who, and the fourth category, people who no matter what will never believe. I'm not going to convince them either way. It's a waste of time. And so I don't come out here for people to say, oh, I want you to believe in me or believe what I'm saying. That's irrelevant. What I'm trying to say is get the data, get the government to do what it needs to do, collect more data so we can figure this out. That's all this is about for me. because I've seen the compelling data back when I was in the Pentagon. And it was very compelling. And I can tell you that the senators and some of the people in our government have received now similar briefings with even more relevant data. And they are all unanimously coming out saying the same thing. Anybody who's received that classified briefing has come out and said, we need to take this seriously. And that's really my only perspective in this, is that I think we can both agree that we need more data.
Yeah, I'd love to have more data.
And we need more transparency into this.
Yeah. I would certainly put myself in the category of people who would be convinced by compelling data. I would love to see this data that you unfortunately are unable to share with me. But for now,
I think that data is starting to come out.
Yeah,
I do think
that
that
would be
data
great.
is
Well, I guess I can wait.
and it's coming out in a legal way, right, where nobody gets in trouble. So
yeah. Well, I have a huge list of questions yet to be answered. Unfortunately, we didn't have time for it, but
Mick, I'm happy to do this again sometime.
Great. That
Absolutely.
would be great. Yeah.
You got it. You have an open invitation.
Stuff. And a lot of people on Twitter asked me to ask you questions, and we don't really have time. So I know you have a hard stop on the hour, and you've gone a few minutes over, which is great. So I just want to thank you very much for this time. It's been a very interesting conversation. And
my
hopefully
pleasure.
we can
thank
continue
you so
it.
much.
Okay. Thank you.
You have an open invitation anytime.
Great. Thanks. I will take it up. So
you got it.
Talk to you later. Bye.
Take care.